Hi, welcome to Lesson 1 of Chef's Apprentice, Learning to Cook Like a Pro, one small plate at a time. This lesson is called Grilled Ham and Cheese Bites. This will be your first small plate. It will also be your first step in learning to cook like a pro. You will learn several techniques, which I will describe in a moment. So let's start cooking. This little ham and cheese sandwich that we're going to make it would be good as an amuse bouche. Sometimes in a restaurant you'll get what they'll call an amuse bouche. It's to amuse or to excite or to wake up the palate. It could also be a garnish for a soup. Now the word garnish can be used in a couple different ways. Garnish can mean chopped parsley that you sprinkle on top of something. That's a garnish. It could also mean just some parsley you put on a plate to make the plate look nice. But it can also mean part of the dish itself. For example, if you had a tomato soup, you could use this ham and cheese bite that we're going to make as a garnish for that soup. You could sit it on the edge of it, maybe cut it, slice it a little bit, and put it on the edge of the bowl, and that would be a garnish for the soup. Now we're going to learn various techniques today. We're going to learn to chop, and I'll talk about the knives in just a moment. You'll get to become accustomed to using a chef's knife. This is a chef's knife here, and we'll talk more about the knife as I go on. And we're also going to learn about prepping fresh ingredients. We're also going to learn about seasoning. Now when I use the word seasoning, it only means salt and pepper. Salt and pepper. So seasoning means salt and pepper. And seasoning is crucial to every dish. And you are going to need to decide how much salt and pepper you're going to need for every dish. And by the time you finish this course, you will be a seasoning ninja. Now the salt that we use is, at least at this stage, at the beginning of cooking, as opposed to maybe finishing it at the end, the salt we use at this stage is always kosher salt. And pepper that we use is always freshly ground out of a peppermill. We're also going to learn to make what's called a compound goat cheese. And compound means you take an ingredient, say cheese or butter, and you mix things in with it, and it makes it a compound butter or compound cheese. We're also going to be grilling bread, and we're going to be slicing, and those are all the techniques that we're going to be learning today. We're also going to learn to make a prep list. Now, this is an easy dish, so the prep list is short, but I started a practice a long time ago of making a prep list for absolutely every task that goes into making a dish. This way you don't miss anything. This way you make sure you have every ingredient that you need, and you can also prioritize them. And the way I prioritize, for example, is I write down everything. It's almost always in roughly the order it needs to be done, but invariably you'll forget to include something and you'll write it at the end. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in the order that you'll be performing these tasks. But after I make a list of everything that needs to be done, I put a star, an asterisk, next to the ones that need to be done well in advance. And then I put a little dash next to the ones that need to be done before you can do, that you need to do next, basically, before you can do any kind of assembly. And then the ones that don't have any marking next to them, those are usually the cooking or the assembly steps, making something as opposed to preparing the ingredients for it. So that's the prep list. Now, also one other thing you're going to learn about here is mise en place, French term. It means you have everything that you need, and you have it where you need it. Now, mise en place that's M-I-S-E-N-P-L-A-C-E, mise en place. It usually means just the ingredients, but we're going to be using it more broadly in this course to talk about everything that you need to make the dish that we're making. So, for example, in this mise en place, we need the ingredients, which is a goat cheese. In French, the term is chevre, C-H-E-V-R-E, and it needs to be room temperature for this dish. We also need a shallot. We need some dates. We're using dates. You could also use figs, but figs are not in season right now, so we're going to use dates. And how many do you need? Well, look at how much cheese you have and decide how many dates you need. I figured we needed about 3 dates for this amount of cheese so that you get a good distribution of the chopped dates within the cheese. We need 1 clove of garlic. We need some sage leaves. These have already been washed and dried. And then we need prosciutto. Now this needs to be kept in the refrigerator until you're ready to use it. I'm going to stop now and put it in the fridge. I'll be right back. Now, in addition to the ingredients, we're going to need some equipment. One thing we're going to need is some way to grill these little ham and cheese bites. I like to use a George Foreman grill. These are great. You could also use a frying pan. If you use a frying pan for this preparation, I'd suggest you use a non-stick frying pan, especially early in the course. Also, we need a chef's knife. This is a rather large chef's knife. Some people are not comfortable with a knife this big. I use a knife this size and also a little smaller. Normally I use Wusthof brand knives, but those are out being sharpened right now. However, this knife I had made in Japan, and it is scary sharp. Very good chef's knife. We'll also need to have a bread slicing knife, which you can see is serrated on the edges here. We'll also need a bowl and a wooden spoon to make the compound chevre. And we'll need a brush to brush the butter onto the bread. Oh, also, I forgot to mention one ingredient earlier, and that's some melted butter. I melted a couple of tablespoons into this bowl using the microwave. You can see in here the milk solids that are around the edges. If we were making clarified butter, it's not needed for this dish. If we were making clarified butter, we'd get all of those milk solids out. But for this dish, we don't need to remove them. Just need to melt the butter, and you just need to melt enough to brush the sides of your sandwich bread. We also need to have a spreader. Now you could just use a knife. I use this Wusthof spreader. It's serrated on one side and not on the other, so you can use it to spread the compound chevre on the bread. And we're going to be peeling this garlic clove. I normally just peel it by crushing it, and the skin, the peel will come right off. I'll show you that when we start. But in situations where you don't want to crush the clove, you can use one of these peel-all tubes. They're rubber tubes. You put the clove inside and roll it, and the skin comes right off. It's like a miracle. This one's made by Peel-All Easy Roll Garlic Peeler, which you can find in kitchen shops or obviously online. And then the last thing that we'll need as for our mise en place is a plate to put the dish on at the very end. And we're just making a small amuse bouche, and we're only going to make one of them, so we only need a small plate. All right, so we're going to start with our prep list, and the first thing that I have on the list here that has an asterisk, which again means the things that you need to do early on, is to prep the chevre. Now, as I said earlier, this needs to be room temperature. I brought it out to room temperature earlier. You need to cut open this this container, this packaging here, and then we want to take it out and put it into the bowl. Okay, there's a little left on the wrapper. I'll make use of that later on for something else. So that's prepping the chevre, and in this case we're calling for 4 ounces of the chevre. Now I bought a chevre that already has herbs in it, so it's already has some herbs, probably parsley and sage and things like that, but we're going to be adding some more. The other thing that needs to be done early on, we have another star here, is to melt the unsalted butter. And by the way, for most cooking applications you want to use unsalted butter. You may have grown up using salted butter. People are used to the salty taste, but you're going to be adding salt to every dish, so you want to control that salt, not someone else. So use unsalted butter. And then the next thing we have an asterisk next to is to heat the grill. Now I plugged in the George Foreman grill a little while ago, so it's up to temperature. Now as we go, I always cross things off the list that have been done. Now the next thing we're going to do is we are going to pit these dates. Now as I mentioned earlier, you can use figs, but figs are out of season, so we're going to use dates. You're going to slice it open just like this, one slice, and butterfly it. Take the pit out of the center. Then we're going to cut these up. Now, dates are very sticky, so be careful, because you don't want them to stick to the knife and then cut yourself as you're trying to cut them. Now, when you buy these dates, you want to try to get them that are as moist as possible. I got these at Whole Foods. They usually have some that are relatively fresh and moist. Fresh means right off of a date palm, which is something you can't get in the United States. So, you know, they've been imported and they're as fresh as you can get. Now, we're going to just chop these like this. Now, this, you know, because they stick, they're going to stick to the knife. So we need to keep moving them around. Hold your knife like this with the handle. Put your hand on this end so you can rock it. That's the point of a chef's knife. It has a curvature to the blade, so it can be rocked into whatever it is that you're chopping. We're going to be getting it off the side of the knife without hurting ourselves, brushing downward, not upward. We're going to chop these dates fairly finely. Okay. And then, let's do it just a little bit more. Okay, now we're going to put these into the bowl with the chevre. Now, it's important to work clean. So we now have a lot of sticky stuff on the side of this knife, so I'm going to break and clean the knife off, and I'll be right back. All right, so we have pitted and we've chopped our figs. Now we're going to chop the garlic. And as I said, we have 1 clove. If you put it on its side and then you press down on it like this, the skin will come right off. Then when you go to chop it, first of all, we want to cut off the little root end here, which is hard. Put that aside. And then find a flat side of the garlic, put it down on your cutting board. Bend your fingers under like this. Keep your thumb behind your index finger. If you do that, it's very hard to cut yourself. You slice it like this. You can go up very close to your fingers because your fingers are curved underward and your thumb is behind those other fingers, so it's not out there where it can get damaged. Slice it and then chop it fairly finely. Okay. Off the knife. Put that into the bowl with the chevre and the dates. You can cross that one off the list. Now we need about a tablespoon of shallots. Now, great way to peel a shallot, make it a little easier than you might than it would be otherwise be, is to take the shallot, put it on the board, press down on it with your hand like this while you roll it. And then cut off the end where the sprout is coming out like this. And then if the skin hasn't already fallen off in that process, it's very easy to get off what's remaining. Okay? Let's get this out of the way. Now, we only need about a tablespoon of shallot. So we're going to cut this baby down the middle, and you'll gain from experience how much you'll really need to cut so you can get the amount that you need for the recipe. And so I sliced it along the same direction as the ribs in the shallot. And now we're just going to make fine mincing cuts here so that you don't have to do much or any more chopping after you finish this. Now, this is probably about 2 tablespoons. So we're only going to use about half of it. Put that in there. Keep the rest of the shallot for some other purpose. All right, so we've got our shallot. Now we need to have our sage, and we need about a tablespoon of the sage. Now, you can just put this down on the board and start chopping it. Another way you can do it, which makes it a little bit easier, is if you stack the leaves like this and then roll the leaves as best you can, so you get a little roll of them. Then slice it this way across the roll, and you'll get these little strips of sage, which actually is called a chiffonade. And then you can chop that very quickly. Put that sage into the bowl with the other ingredients. So we have now our sage. Now I said that the prosciutto needs to be cold, so I'm going to go off camera for a moment, get rid of our garbage, and I'll be back with the cold prosciutto. So here we have the prosciutto. Now, the reason that I wanted it to be cold for this recipe is because it makes it easier to chop. Another thing that makes it easier to chop is if you buy prosciutto that's relatively dry. Now, it's sometimes hard to tell that by looking at the package. You just have to kind of learn that as you go along. I couldn't find any that was really very dry. This is pretty moist, and we're just pulling off enough so we can. You know, it's going to be so it's evenly distributed throughout the chevre. Now, the best way to chop prosciutto is like this. You'll start to have prosciutto flying around after a little bit, but it's a lot easier to chop it this way than with the knife right down on the board. Okay, so that, I'll just do a little bit more. Now, so you can see it's nice and kind of crumbly chopped. And put that into the bowl with the other ingredients. Now, we now have all of our ingredients in the bowl, and next thing we're going to do is make the compound chevre. And to do that, you want to have a relatively large stainless steel bowl. It makes it a lot easier to press the ingredients around. If you try to do it in a smaller bowl, it's just harder to do. So what we're doing is we're using this wooden spoon, the back of the wooden spoon actually, and spreading everything around in the bowl, mixing it well. And that doesn't take long, as you can see. Get all those ingredients mixed in. Try to get a nice distribution so that you don't have any lumps of cheese that don't have anything in them. It doesn't take long to do that. So there's one more thing that we need to do with the compound chevre, and that is to season it. Now, this has prosciutto in it, and prosciutto is salty. Also, the chevre had a little bit of salt added to it. So we don't want to add very much salt. Now, when you salt something, when you season something with salt, you want it to have just the slightest salty taste when you taste it. Also, we're going to put in a couple of grinds of pepper, not much because there's not a lot here, and then we're going to mix that up thoroughly. And taste it. Perfect. There's a nice balance between the saltiness that was already in the chevre and the prosciutto and a little bit of salt and pepper that we've just added. So there, now we have our compound chevre. Now you can use whatever you need to use for this recipe, and then put the rest away, put it in a little bowl with some plastic wrap on top. You can even freeze it. You can roll it up in make it into a log, like a roll it up in some plastic wrap, put it in the freezer, pull it out and wrap it, just cut off a little slice of it when you need it. Okay, so the compound chevre is made. Now next we're going to talk about the bread. Now I think when I did the mise en place earlier, I didn't actually mention the bread. You can use any kind of bread. You can use sandwich bread, you can use white bread, you can use wheat bread. I'm going to try using these Euro Classic brioche rolls that I got at Whole Foods because they are so darn good. So they were $5 for a package of 2, 4, 6 of them. Use them for sandwiches, use them for burgers. They come in a burger shape as well. This is just a roll shape, but they come in a burger shape. Come like this. Now I've already sliced off the ends of one of them, and we're going to use this part here to make our sandwich, to make our little grilled ham and cheese bites. Now we're going to have to cut it down the middle like this. Now brioche, these are brioche. They already have a lot of butter in them, but we need to brush them with butter anyway. Like I said, we'll need to brush them with butter anyway. So what we're going to do is first we're going to take some of the chevre with our spreader and spread it into the little sandwich. Put a generous amount in there. Now, if you're using sandwich bread, you can. What I would probably do is I'd cut off the crusts, use just the bread, spread as much into the whole piece of bread as you like, and then put the top on. And then later, after they're done, slice them into smaller pieces. But we're using this smaller this smaller bread to start with, and so we have our melted butter starting to solidify a little bit because it's room temperature, and we're just going to brush the top, roll it over, and we're going to brush the bottom, just like that. Now, we've sliced the bread from our list here, and we have brushed the bread with the butter, and we've assembled the bites by putting the cheese inside. Remember, I said they're not always in order on the list, but they're just there to make sure you do everything. So now we're ready to grill it. So let's open the George Foreman grill, put it inside, close the lid, and we're going to let that grill for a little bit off camera. Okay, so we've been letting this grill for a couple of minutes. You just need to check it every now and then, so to see if it's as golden as you would like. And I think this is looking pretty good. So we're going to take the little spatula that comes with the George Foreman grill and take the little grilled ham and cheese bite off of there. And now this is probably pretty hot, so I'm going to hold it carefully and slice it down the middle with the bread knife. Clean up the edges a little bit, and then we're going to plate them like this. I want to try to do something that's creative looking if you can. Now remember, I said that this could also be used for a garnish of a soup, but we plated it as an amuse bouche. And these are the best tasting little grilled cheese ham and cheese sandwiches you probably ever had. Yeah, they are. So that's lesson 1, grilled ham and cheese bites. You learned chopping, use of a chef's knife, prepping fresh ingredients, seasoning. We also made a compound cheese spread. We grilled the bread, we sliced it, and we made our first and completed our first prep lesson. So that's the end of lesson 1. Thank you for your time.